All right. It is 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Thanks, everyone, for joining this morning. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping procedures here. If everyone can remain on mute during the presentation so there isn't any background noise, that would be much appreciated. There's one button I'd like you all to avoid hitting. It's a little rectangle with an up arrow. That is the Present Now button. Please do not hit that, as that will interrupt Mr. Kitty's presentation. If you have any technical issues, please put those questions into the chat feature, and either myself or Sue Unger on the call here will help you through those. Just be aware that most of the time the issues stem from your own Wi-Fi connection. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put those into the chat as well, and we will prompt Jeff as needed. If anyone has dialed in via telephone today, please send me an email at mfrey@pgahq.com. We'll make sure you get your MSR credits. And finally, we are recording this today, so this will be available on our YouTube channel in the future, should you ever want to refer back to it or share it with any of your colleagues. So before we get into the actual rules presentation, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Clark Lewis for a song.
Thank you, Matt. I started off, I sang God Bless America at Tom Karpus's webinar, and I usually try to sing something different, but with the way things are going in the world today, I think we can sing, it would be appropriate to sing it again. As the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us pledge allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
That away, Clarky. Thank you
very much.
Very nice.
Thank you.
So now I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeff Kitty. Jeff, of course, is our honorary president and serves on the PGA of America's National Rules Committee. So Jeff has been involved in major championships, and I'd like to turn it over to him for the presentation. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Matt. Clarky, thanks again. We're pretty lucky in the Philly section to have the involvement that we have with the National Rules Committee. I'm one of four, and we've got Alice and Clark on the call this morning, who are two of our others, and of course Tom Karpus is a past chair of the Rules Committee. So I feel fortunate to be included, and nice to have everybody this morning. It's nice to be talking a little bit of golf. Feels like, after a 60-degree day yesterday, we're getting close to spring and getting back to playing some golf. But I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of downtime with somewhat of a real winter. All right, we are going to roll into Rule 14 today. We're going to cover just about all of it. We've got 7 parts of it, but we're not going to cover 14.4. 14.4 is covered in a different part. When we do these rules workshops, it's covered with the status of the ball. So just about all of Rule 14 we're going to cover today. So get right in. So we're going to kind of break this up into 2 parts. And with the questions, I know Matt or Sue will probably help moderate the questions. I can't see the questions as they come up, so somebody will let us know if we've got some questions, so we can try to make this as interactive as possible in this virtual setting. Okay, so we're going to start out with the first 3 parts of Rule 14. We're going to do 1, 2, and 3 first, and then we'll we'll get to the second half here. So talk about the first parts here, purpose statement, and then 14.1, 2, and 3. Okay, and this presentation is going to cover when a ball can be lifted during the play of a hole without penalty, when we're required to mark it before a ball is lifted, and when marking it is not required. 4 times when cleaning a lifted ball is not permitted. The requirements for replacing a ball when putting it back in play. The variety of things that can go wrong when replacing a ball and how to fix them. Dropping to put a ball in play, including when dropping again is required. How to drop it in the right way to avoid any penalties. And what to do when a drop ball is deliberately deflected or stopped by a person. Okay. Rule 14 covers when and how the player may mark the spot of a ball at rest and then lift and clean the ball. How we're going to put that ball back into play so that the ball is played from the right place. When a lifted ball or moved ball is to be replaced, same ball must be set down on its original spot. And when taking free relief or penalty relief, a substituted ball or the original ball must be dropped in a particular relief area. 14 is also going to cover a mistake in using these procedures may be corrected without penalty. Talk a little bit about the eraser rule. And that's before that we're going to avoid that penalty if we correct it before the ball is played. But the player gets a penalty if he or she plays the ball from the wrong place. Okay. So we'll get into 14.1 first here. Broken up in these way. We're going to have a couple definitions that we're going to start with, and then we'll roll into the rule. Okay, so our first definition here is mark. To show the spot where a ball is at rest either by placing a ball marker right behind or right next to the ball. This is done to show the spot where the ball must be replaced after it is lifted, or by holding a club on the ground right behind or right next to the ball. People always ask me if that's okay, and it is okay. But go up to the first part here again, right behind or next to. There's no requirement of the ball marker having to be behind. It could be in the front side. It's just a mark that, it's a spot that we're identifying so we know where to put the ball back to get it back in the same place that it was. So there is no requirement. I think a best practice is to put it behind. I don't think you ever see anybody on tour or high levels of play where they stick it on the side or in front. You just create, a potential problem or a mistake by the player, but there is no requirement on that. And same thing, you don't see this on tour very much where somebody, or really at all, where somebody marks it with the toe of the putter or something, but it is okay. So ball marker, our next definition, is an artificial object when used to mark the spot of that lifted ball, okay? Artificial object is the key part here, okay? Such as examples are a tee, a coin, an object made specifically to be a ball marker, or another piece of small equipment. So kind of a couple of key words in there, artificial and small. We're kind of recommending that it be a small piece of equipment. We're not going to put down something huge that could interfere with other players' play. I know some players, even in our section have gotten, suggested that we shouldn't be using poker chips and, large coins, things like that. But it doesn't specify. It just says it suggests a small piece of equipment. When a rule refers to a ball marker being moved, this means a ball marker in place on the course to mark the spot of the ball that has not been replaced. The ball has not been yet replaced. So when it refers to that ball marker moving, that means it's there on the ground identifying the spot of where we're going to replace the ball. This rule is going to apply to the deliberate lifting of a player's ball at rest, which includes picking up the ball by hand rotating it, even if when you were rotating it, it didn't truly come off the ground, that would still be considered lifting, and otherwise deliberately causing it to move from its spot. Deliberately, again, being another key word here. Spot of the ball to be lifted and replaced must be marked. So before lifting a ball, under whatever rule we'd be operating under, or requiring the ball to be replaced on its original spot, the player must mark that spot. Okay? So we got a couple different ways that we're marking that spot here in these pictures, with a T on the right and again with a ball marker on the left, or a coin. So marking that spot means placing a ball marker right behind or right next to that ball, or again holding the club right behind or next to the ball. If the spot is marked with a ball marker, after replacing the ball, the player must remove the ball marker before making the stroke. Have to remove that. If the player lifts the ball without marking its spot, or if the player marks its spot in a wrong way or makes a stroke with the ball marker left in place, the player is going to get a one stroke penalty. This is referred to, this 1.3C4 is referred to a lot in the rules. So it just means if multiple breaches result from a single act or related acts, we're going to refer to this. So this one in particular, if a player's single act or related acts breach more than one of the procedural requirements, so for marking, lifting, cleaning, dropping, or placing the ball, where the penalty is one stroke, we're only going to get a one stroke penalty. So such as an example would be not marking it and then cleaning it while we had lifted it. We're only going to get the one penalty stroke. One stroke penalty. Okay, when a ball is lifted to take relief under rule, the player is not required to mark the spot before lifting the ball. So this player is dealing with some abnormal ground conditions here. When the player is taking relief from this, he doesn't have to mark the spot where that ball is. Doesn't have to. Again, I think oftentimes it is a best practice. Marking it will oftentimes help us determine where the nearest point of complete relief is, that reference point that we need to determine. So, but we don't have to. Who may lift the ball? Player's ball may be lifted under the rules by only by the player. Okay. Quick reference here: if we're playing foursomes or four ball, that the partner can do anything that the player is allowed to do. But in rules 1 through 20, we're talking about the individuals. So, okay. Ball also could be lifted by anyone that the player authorizes to do such. But that authorization must be given each time before the ball is lifted. You can't just give this blanket authorization at the beginning of the round saying you can lift it anytime you want. Every time that we're giving somebody else authorization, or anytime we want them to do it, we have to give them authorization each time. Okay. We have an exception, though, that caddies may lift the player's ball in the putting green without authorization. When the ball is on the putting green. Caddies can only do it when the ball is on the putting green. His or her caddy may lift the ball without the player's authorization. So if the caddies are doing a good job and they're getting up to the green before the players, they can mark the ball, lift it, clean it, put it back down on the spot, replace it, and pick the ball marker back up and help keep pace of play moving. So it was a really nice, for those of us that administer caddy programs, a lot of them were doing it anyway, just to try to keep play moving, but now it's within the rules. However, if the caddy lifts the ball without authorization when it is anywhere except the putting green, the player is going to get one penalty stroke. Okay, so again, that authorization or that exception where a caddy can do that is only on the putting green. Cleaning a lifted ball. The ball lifted from the putting green may always be cleaned. A ball lifted from anywhere else may always be cleaned, except when we're lifting it for these several reasons. Okay, if we're lifting it to see if it's cut or cracked, there's no cleaning allowed. So if you can't see that cut or crack, you think it might be hidden under mud, you can't clean that mud to see if it's cracked. To identify it, you can only clean it as much as needed to identify it. So if you mark it with a circle over your number, over the play number, and you can't see that circle because it's covered with mud, you can clean that mud off just enough that you can see your identification mark, but you can't clean it beyond that. You can't clean it if you're marking it because it interferes with play. So you got two balls that are right next to here. We're gonna mark one of these balls so the other player can play. And when we do so, we can't clean the ball. You see the player is going in there what I call the two-finger prong, where they're picking it up so delicately. It's not a requirement. Some people think you have to do it that way, but if you're gonna make sure that everybody knows you're not doing something that you shouldn't be doing, it's not a terrible practice to do it that way. Especially if let's say the golf ball, it's really wet in the morning and you pick it up and you hold it in your hand, you could probably be cleaning it. So, but when we're lifting it up because it's interfering with play, we cannot clean it. And also to see if it's lying in condition where relief is allowed. Cleaning is not allowed unless the player then takes relief under that rule. So here we've got Tiger, he's looking down there he might mark and lift that ball to see if he is being interfered with by maybe a sprinkler head or something. When he lifts it up to see if he can do that, he can't clean it. However, if he then proceeds under that rule or any other rule, he's going to be able to clean the ball. But just to lift it to see if there's interference, you would not be able to clean it. If the player cleans a lifted ball when not allowed, he or she is going to get one penalty stroke. And again, this is our multiple breaches. So if we failed to mark it before we lifted it and then we cleaned it, we're still only going to get that one penalty stroke. And again, talking about foursomes and four ball handled in 22 and 23. All right, we got any questions yet, Matt?
I don't see any at this moment.
Okay, you got it, Sue?
It looks like it's all good. And I guess if someone does in the middle of the presentation, there's that little hand raising. If you click on that, it'll just say like Sue Unger is raising their hand, so that you don't have to address it immediately. But if you decide you want to answer it, that's another way too.
I expect a bunch of questions from you this morning, Sue.
Okay.
All right, 14-2, replacing the ball on the spot. And we're going to have one definition to cover. We'll get rolling into it. So I'll give you a little bit of time to read this, and we'll go over the answer to this question at the end of this segment. So if you want to just take a little bit of time to read this, kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be covering and get you thinking there. I like that we do this now where we put the questions at the beginning of it to kind of get us thinking where we're headed. All right, we'll read these when we get to the end too. We'll go through them. All right, this rule applies whenever a ball is lifted or moved, and a rule requires it to be replaced on a spot. Their definition of replace, and that's to place a ball by setting it down and letting it go with the intent for it to be in play. Okay. We have to be intending that we're putting this back into play for it to be considered replacing. The player sets a ball down without intending it to be in play. The ball has not been replaced and is not in play. So an example, I've got a couple members that do this, and I don't fully understand why. They've got a long putt, 40, 50-foot putt, and they've got their ball marker on the green, and they come back and they put their ball on the green, and they'll put it behind the ball marker when they had placed the ball marker behind the ball. So they put it down with the intent of just being able to see it from a distance, but their intent was not to put it back into play. They didn't intend to put it into play, and they didn't put it in the right place either. So they have not replaced the ball in that example. Whenever a rule requires a ball to be replaced, the rule involved identifies a specific spot where the ball must be replaced. So we've got an example here of Rule 9.4a, talking about replacing it on its original spot. And the player had accidentally moved their ball, and they're going to be required to replace it on the original spot. And if we don't know that spot, we're going to estimate it. Talk about that a few times this morning. Okay, 14.2a says the original ball must be used. The original ball must be used when replacing a ball, with these exceptions. Another ball may be used if the original ball cannot be recovered without reasonable effort and in a few seconds, so long as the player did not deliberately cause the ball to become unrecoverable. So we'll play a video here.
Bizarre happening here at the fourth earlier today. Ian Poulter, birdie putt. Well, yeah, I mean, you can't hit it easy enough. I mean, there's no way. I'm sure he couldn't believe the ball stopped there in the first place. Now watch this. Goes to mark the ball and kind of swipe at it to pick it up, and he loses it, and it goes in the water.
Those videos come through, Clark? Alice, can you see those?
Yes, we
Great.
see them.
Great. So obviously, Ian's not going to be able to retrieve that ball very easily, and he didn't, do anything with intent. He didn't mean to do that, so he's going to be able to replace that ball. Another exception is if the original ball is cut or cracked. We don't have to replace the original ball. If we're resuming play after it had been stopped, we don't have to use the original ball. Okay. If the original ball was played by another player, that's a wrong ball. So we've got an example here where Ed on the left here is playing David's ball. And obviously they don't know it. Hopefully David would stop him from doing such. But we're not going to require David to go, 170 yards downrange to get that ball to replace the original ball. We're going to allow David to save that time and use another ball. Okay, skip that part. All right, who must replace ball and how it must be replaced? Player's ball must be replaced under the rules only by the player. Okay. And again, we got that kind of exception with rules 22 and 23. Or it could also be replaced by the person who lifted the ball. So if we give authorization to somebody to lift the ball, that person can also replace it. But even if that person was not allowed to do so under the rules, that person can also replace the ball. Doesn't mean they have to. If that person lifted the ball, the player themselves could replace the ball too. It doesn't have to be the person that lifted it. Okay. Also, any person who caused it to move could be the one that replaced it. The player plays a ball that was replaced by someone not allowed to do so. The player gets one penalty stroke. All right. How the ball must be replaced. The ball must be replaced by setting it down on that required spot and letting it go so that it stays on that spot. The player plays a ball that was replaced in a wrong way, but on the required spot, the player gets 1 penalty stroke. So an example of how you could replace it in a wrong way. Let's say you're replacing it on the putting green, and you just dropped the ball on the green, and then rolled it over with your putter to that spot. So that would be replacing it in the wrong way, even though you might have gotten it on the right spot. You have to replace it by hand, placing it down on that spot. The ball must be replaced on its original spot again. And if we don't know that spot, we're going to estimate it. Okay. An example or an exception of when we're not going to replace it on that spot is when the ball must be replaced on a different spot if that original lie was altered. Okay, so this cart accidentally, or however it happened, ran over that ball. We're not going to replace it into that hole. We're gonna be allowed to put it in a different, replace it in a different spot. So this is just talking about this term reasonable judgment. If we don't know the estimated, if we don't know the original spot, if it's not known, we are estimating it. And we're going to be using this principle or this concept of reasonable judgment. Okay, and there's a lot of rules that require this reasonable judgment. If we're determining a point where a ball last crossed the margin of a penalty area, okay, or if we're returning to a spot if we're returning to a spot on a putting green and we're replacing, it's going to be hard to find the exact spot. Sometimes when we're returning to another place where we played a ball from a fairway, we might have a divot as a reference point that helps us get to that spot that we're replacing to more specifically. But this reasonable judgment concept is just kind of makes it that the player is doing the best they can in estimating these spots. So long as the player does what can be reasonably expected under the circumstances to make an accurate determination, the player's reasonable judgment will be accepted, even if after the stroke is made, the determination is shown to be wrong by video evidence or other information. As long as they were doing what can be reasonably expected, they're doing their best. However, if the player becomes aware of a wrong determination before the stroke is made, we're going to require that player to make the correction. There's enough time now to make the correction, or the timing is right to make that correction. Okay. So when we're talking about replacing on a spot, the ball must be replaced on the spot on its original spot, which if not known is estimated. If the ball was at rest on or under or against any immovable obstruction, integral object, boundary object, or growing or attached natural object. We've got a ball here, stuck in some kind of underbrush growing in the roots of a tree. We're going to replace it to that spot. That spot of the ball includes its vertical location relative to the ground. So we're going to get it back to that spot. We're going to replace it to that original spot on, under, or against any of those objects.
Jeff?
Yes?
It looks like there's a question that came up. John Sly made a comment.
Okay.
It said, in order to correct the mistake of a ball replaced by someone unauthorized, would the player or the unauthorized person simply lift the ball and then have the player replace it prior to making the stroke?
Correct.
Okay.
Correctly stated. All right. If any loose impediments happen to get moved as a result of the ball being lifted or moved, they do not have to be replaced. Okay? If any loose impediments were removed before the ball was replaced, they do not have to be replaced. In 15, we talk about some restrictions of this. Okay, so where are we going to replace the ball if the original lie was altered? If the lie of a lifted or moved ball that must be replaced is altered, the player must replace the ball in this way. And we're going to cover two different scenarios. So if the ball's in sand or if the ball's anywhere else other than in sand. So we'll do sand first. Okay. When the ball was in sand, whether in a bunker or anywhere else on the course, and replacing the ball on its original spot. Again, if it's not known, we're going to estimate it. The player is going to recreate the original lie as much as they can. Okay. Sand is pretty easily able to be manipulated, so we can try to recreate the lie as best we can in doing this. In recreating the lie, the player may leave a small part of the ball visible if the ball had been completely covered by sand originally. So we're going to be allowed to see a little bit of it in recreating that lie. The player fails to recreate the lie in breach of this rule, the player is going to be considered to have played from a wrong place. Okay, if the ball is anywhere except in sand, the player must replace the ball by replacing it on its nearest spot with a lie most similar to the original lie. Again, sometimes we may not have known what exactly the lie was, but we're gonna do our best. We're gonna use that reasonable judgment again. Okay, and we're gonna replace this within one club length from its original spot. Okay, we can't go more than one club length, and we can't go closer to the hole. And we're going to do so in an area in the same area of the course as the spot. So. This ball here that has been run over by the cart, the ball's in the general area. I'm pretty much assuming we're not driving in a penalty area or something, but we're going to say this in the general area. That one club length might extend into a bunker or into a penalty area. So we can't go into those areas. The ball has to be placed in the general area because that's the area of the course that the ball was originally in. If the player knows that the original lie was altered but does not know what the lie was, the player must estimate the original lie and replace it, and replace the ball under 1 or 2. Talked about that just a little bit before. Okay, this is an exception. The lie is altered, when play is stopped. It's be covered under Rule 5. All right, now we're going to talk about what to do if replaced ball does not stay on its original spot. The player is replacing the ball. If the player tries to replace the ball, but it does not stay on its original spot, the player must try a second time. Okay, so that person, I'll play that one more time. A little bit tough to see here. The player replaces it right after they let go of it. The ball rolls, so it did not stay on its spot when replacing it. Again, if the ball does not stay on that spot, the player must replace the ball by placing it on the nearest spot where it'll stay at rest. So, so it's similar to our drop place. We're gonna replace the ball. If it doesn't stay, we're gonna replace it again on the spot where it's supposed to be. If it doesn't stay, then we're gonna replace it on the spot most nearest that spot without going closer to the hole. Okay, so the limits on depending on with the limits depending on where the original spot is located. The spot must not be near the hole, and if the original spot was in the general area, the nearest spot must also be in the general area. The nearest spot we're in a bunker or penalty area, the nearest spot must be either in the same bunker or penalty area. Okay, so we're going to stay in those specific areas. Okay, so we've got a ball in a bunker. Player's pretty sure it's going to roll. They're marking the spot of where the ball originally was. Don't have to do that. It's not a bad practice at all. So he's replacing. It doesn't stay. That's replacing once. Replacing twice. It doesn't stay. Okay. Tries another spot. Doesn't stay. Rules official points out another spot. Very important part here is the proper use of the antenna of the radio. That's really important for a rules official. So found a spot, nearest to the spot where the original ball was, where it would stay. I'd say the other thing for any aspiring rules officials, I'd stay away from that, or maybe stand in a different place from a rules official where I don't end up having footprints in an area where the ball might end up being. But that was a good example of wouldn't stay in its place. Tried a couple different places and found a spot nearest where it would stay in place. And obviously the ball stayed in the bunker because it had to. Okay, if the original spot was on the putting green, the nearest spot must be either on the putting green or in the general area. So in those first few examples, if the original spot was in the general area, the ball's got to remain in the general area. If the nearest spot, if the original spot was in a bunker or in a penalty area, the nearest spot must also be in one of those two specific areas. But if the original spot was on the putting green, the nearest spot must be either on the putting green or in the general area. So you could leave the putting green and go to the general area if that's the nearest spot where the ball will stay. Okay, so he tried to replace once. Second attempt. Also wouldn't stay on its spot. Okay, so he only moved over probably less than an inch from its original spot, but he found a spot that wasn't closer to the hole. Okay, and the third time he found a spot where it would stay. Okay. Some penalty statements here. Sorry, I've got somebody delivering something outside there. Penalty for playing incorrectly substituted ball or playing from a wrong place. We're going to get the general penalty. 1.3C4 statement again. And again, some uniquenesses with 22 and 23 with partner play. All right, so back to our question here. In singles match play, and individual stroke play, which one of the following is true? A ball must be replaced only by the player. Okay, so the kind of the key word up there was singles. The ball must be replaced only by the player. After a player's original ball has been played by a player in another group as a wrong ball, another ball may be used to replace it on the original spot. So that was David and that other guy in that picture that we showed. Except on the putting green, if the original spot of a ball to be replaced is not known, the player must replace it by dropping the ball as near as possible to the estimated original spot, but not near the hole. If the original lie of a player's ball to be replaced has been altered, it is always replaced by placing it on the nearest spot with the lie most similar to the original lie, that is within one club length from its original spot, not near the hole, and in the same area of the course. It's a little bit easier when we do these in person. Okay? But if anybody has any questions as to why the answers why the answer, if you thought A, B, or A, C, or D were the true ones. Okay, so the true statement here: after a player's original ball has been played by a player in another group as a wrong ball, another player may Another ball may be used to replace it on its original spot. So that was the one where he talked about I don't have to go chase it 170 yards down range to pick it up. If anybody has any questions on those, let me know. All right. So any questions on 14.2? All right, 14.3. Dropping ball in relief area. 3 definitions to cover. I always say this for any of these webinars or rule seminars. Knowing the definitions is, I think, the best place to start in rules knowledge. I mean, just knowing the definitions pretty thoroughly will help answer a lot of questions before you even get into the rules. All right, another question here. Give you a second to read it, or a few seconds to read it. All right, we'll get into. So our first definition of is drop. To hold the ball and let go of it so that it falls through the air with the intent for the ball to be in play. So again, we're doing this with the intent for it to be in play. If the player lets go of a ball without intending it to be in play, the ball has not been dropped and it is not in play. Okay, so there was no intention. If you let it go in another way, if you just throw it toward your bag or something, or you just toss it off to the side, there was not intent for it to be in play, and therefore it's not. Each relief rule identifies a specific area where the ball must be dropped and where it must come to rest. In taking relief, the player must let go of the ball from a location at knee height. Knee height can be different. You know, if somebody's 5'2", their knee height's going to be different than Manute Bowles' knee height. That's the height it must be dropped at. So this is just a clarification talking about we're dropping it from knee height. That doesn't mean it has to travel it that full distance. If you're dropping from knee height and you're dropping into the slope of the hill, it might not fall that complete knee height distance, but as long as it was dropped from knee height, you're going to be fine. Okay, we're going to drop the ball from knee height so that the ball falls straight down without the player throwing, spinning, or rolling it, or using any other motion that might affect where the ball will come to rest. We can't try to influence this anyway. We're just going to let it go from knee height, just as this player is doing here, as the picture showing. Okay, and the ball can't touch any of the players, any part of the player's body or equipment before it hits the ground. It's got to hit the ground first for it to be a good drop. Okay. The relief area is the area where a player must drop a ball when taking relief under a rule. Each relief rule requires the player to use a specific relief area whose size and location are based on 3 factors. Okay. The reference point. Okay. So the young woman that's dropping up in that top picture, that X is the reference point. Okay. We're talk about the size of the relief area measured from that reference point, and then the limits on the location of the relief area. Again, there we go. There are the reference points. The top picture taking relief from either a yellow or red penalty area, and they're using back on the line relief. So they're going to identify a reference point to establish a relief area. Okay. player down below is taking relief most likely from a red penalty area, and that reference point is where the ball last crossed that margin, and then that'll determine her relief area. The relief area, the size of the relief area measured from reference point, the relief area is either 1 or 2 club lengths from the reference point, but with certain limits. Those limits or the location of the relief area may be limited in one or more ways so that, for example, it is only in certain defined areas of the course, such as only in the general area or only in a bunker or only in a penalty area. Okay. It is not nearer the hole than the reference point or must be outside a penalty area or a bunker from which relief is being taken. 3, it is where there is no interference as defined in a particular rule from the condition from which relief is being taken. So that covers a number of rules in those three parts there. Each relief rule requires the player to use a specific relief area. And those relief areas whose size and location are based on these 3 factors. Okay. So the reference point is the nearest point of complete relief for this player. She's taken relief from, it looks like a drainage grate or a sprinkler cap. So we're in abnormal course conditions here. So she's marked that reference point where it doesn't interfere with her the lie of the ball or the swing or the area of intended swing or stance. She'd be standing on the other side of it. It looks like she's a right-handed player, but that's her reference point of nearest point of complete relief. Okay. Size of the relief area is 1 club length for this rule. It's 1 club length no closer to the hole. Okay. And it must be in the general area. Her ball is in the general area, so the relief area must be in the general area. So we're identifying a couple specific areas there, the bunker and the putting green, which obviously aren't going to be impacted by her relief area here, but it could. Like I said, it must not be nearer the hole. Okay, so that's taking that 1 club length area from, that's 1 club length in all directions. And this is 1 club length without going closer to the hole. And there must be complete relief from all interference of this abnormal course condition. So, that's showing that there's part of this relief area that's probably that's not going to be having taken complete relief. And using club lengths to determine the size of a relief area, the player may measure. We can measure across a ditch, a hole, or something similar, and directly across or through an object like a tree, fences, walls, tunnels, drains, things like that. But we're not allowed to measure through ground slope that naturally slopes up or down. It's more easily kind of shown as an example if we were in person, but we had a few of those at the Ryder Cup this year with the really steep banks that fall off some of the greens. But then the ball was getting hung up in tall grasses before it went all the way to the bottom. So that created some interesting, determining relief areas. Our friend that we were just talking about earlier this morning, Ted Antonopoulos, had one on 17, and trying to help the player understand that can be difficult. Okay, so the club length in determining a relief area is the length of the longest club of your 14 or fewer clubs, if you don't carry 14 clubs, that the player has during the round. That's not the putter. Okay, so if you're a player that uses a a putter that's longer than any of your other clubs, that putter is not used in determining a relief area. It's your longest club that's not your putter. Usually it's somebody's driver. If you're somebody that doesn't carry a driver, maybe it's your 3-wood or your brassy or whatever you might call it. But a 2-wood or something like that. But just about everybody, it's going to be your driver. So the example here, if your longest club, other than a putter, a player has during a round is 43 inches. Be a pretty short driver. The club length is 43 inches for that player for that round. Okay, if you switch drivers in the next round, he's got a 46-inch driver. His club length for determining, club lengths is going to be 46 inches. So not everybody's club length is the same length. And club lengths are used in defining the player's teeing area on each hole. So it's kind of unique that, if I use a 42-inch driver and Clarkie uses a 46.5-inch driver, Clarkie's teeing area is, in depth is longer than mine is. So it seems kind of weird that the areas that we play from might be different, but that's the case. Okay, and we also use club lengths in determining the size of the player's relief area when taking relief under this rule. Or under a rule, sorry. Talking about dropping a ball in a relief area, this rule applies whenever a player must drop a ball in taking relief under a rule, including when the player must complete taking relief by placing a ball under 14.3C2. Rule 8 covers what would happen if a player improves the relief area or when they're dropping a ball. Okay. 14.3a says that original ball or another ball may be used. The player may use the original ball or another ball. This means that the player may use any ball each time he or she drops or places a ball under this rule. Hard to believe it's already 3 years ago since the rules changed, but golf's been a little bit crazy since 1 year after 2019, but it's already been 3 years. So, I still kind of want to say this was a nice change, but it's really not that. I mean, it's a decent amount of time now since it's happened, but the ball must be dropped in the right way. The player must drop a ball in the right way, which means all three of these things need to happen. Start with the first one here. The player must drop the ball. The ball must be dropped only by the player. And neither the caddy or anyone else is allowed to drop it. Ball must be dropped straight down from knee height without touching the player or equipment. Talked about this a little bit already. The player must let go of the ball from a location at knee height. Got to fall straight down without the player throwing, spinning, or rolling it or trying to manipulate it in any other way. Using any motion that might affect where the ball will come to rest. Does not touch any part of the player's body or equipment before it hits the ground. Keyword being before. Okay. So knee height means that the height of the player's knee when in a standing position. So the two kind of illustrations there on the right, you can clearly see that the ball is being dropped from knee height, and it's at the knee height of, that they're demonstrating there for the woman that's standing and the guy that's dropping from knee height there, even from a kneeling position or a one-kneed position. But Brandon Grace here in this picture, his knee height of his body in that crouch position is lower than his knee height would be if he was standing. But you can see that he's holding the ball higher than those knees. So he's holding the ball high enough that it would be considered what his knee height would be if he was in a standing position. I don't know why we would complicate it so much like that. Quite frankly, that top illustration seems pretty easy to me. Instead of taking a knee to drop the ball or squatting and try to determine what knee height is, without seeing it, but he'd be okay. That would be considered dropping from knee height for that picture of Brandon Grace. Okay, the ball must be dropped in the relief area. The player can stand inside or outside the relief area. There's no requirement for where the player stands when they're dropping. It's only about the ball. Okay, if a ball is dropped in a wrong way, in breach of one or more of these items, okay. So all those requirements that we talked about, if we breached any of those, we'd be dropping the ball in a wrong way. We're going to require the player to drop again in the right way, and there's no limit to the number of times the player must do so. So if I'm forgetting that we're supposed to be dropping from knee height and I'm dropping from shoulder height and I do it 50 times, as long as I fix it before I play my next stroke and I drop from knee height, there's not going to be a penalty. So that's what that means about the number of times. A ball dropped in the wrong way does not count as one of the 2 drops required before a ball must be placed under 14.3C2. So in that drop place, when we're proceeding under that, where we have to drop twice and then place where the ball hits the ground the second time it hits the ground. Any drops in the wrong way don't count as part of that drop place. Is either of those drops of so. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If the player does not drop again and instead makes a stroke at the ball from where it came to rest after being dropped in the wrong way or in a wrong way, the ball was played from the relief area, the player gets a 1-stroke penalty. So if we dropped in the wrong way, but we got it into the right place, if we got it into the relief area, we're only going to get a penalty of 1 stroke. But if the ball was played from outside the relief area, so we dropped it in the wrong way and in the wrong place, we're going to get a 2-stroke penalty. We're going to be getting it for playing from a wrong place, essentially. And the fact that we dropped in a wrong way is almost not going to be counted. We're not going to get 2 strokes for playing from a wrong place plus 1 stroke from playing for taking a drop in a wrong, or for dropping in a wrong way. We're only going to get the general penalty. Not only, it's a significant penalty, but we're not going to get 2 and an additional 1. If the ball was played after it was placed when it required to be dropped, again, we're going to get it. We're going to get it, the general penalty. So 2 strokes in stroke play and loss of hole in match play. Okay. 14.3C, ball dropped in the right way must come to rest in the relief area. This rule applies only when ball is dropped in the right way, which we just covered pretty specifically here. Okay, so the first part, player is completed taking relief when ball dropped in right way comes to rest in the relief area. Dropped it correctly, it's in the right place. And we'll cover what to do if ball dropped in the right way comes to rest outside the relief area. Player is completed taking relief when ball dropped in the right way comes to rest in the relief area. The ball must come to rest in that relief area. So there's that shaded out area for the player. We've got a clarification here of what it means for a ball to be in a relief area. So that ball that's right on the edge has some of it is touching the relief area, and you can see that yellow T right here. That's the reference point. That's the point where if we go forward of that, we'd be closer to the hole. So this ball is touching part of the relief area. So consistent with all of our other rules, if it's touching part of the relief area, it's considered to be in the relief area. But if any part of the ball is within one or is, in this next picture here, if that ball is still touching the relief area, but it's forward of the reference point. So even though it is touching part of the relief area, part of that ball is forward of the reference point, so it's closer to the hole. So that's not going to be considered to be in the relief area, even though part of it's touching. So pretty specific, but important. It does not matter whether the ball, after hitting the ground, touches any person, equipment, or other outside influence before coming to rest. So this is nice for the player, because the way we're dropping, from knee height, we're versus when we used to drop with our arm extended away from us, we were a little bit further away from the ball then than we are now. So there's a likelihood that it could take a funny bounce and hit your foot, or hit something, hit your leg or something. So it doesn't matter if that happens, if it hits us before coming to rest. So that ball stayed in the relief area, even though it hit the player's foot. That ball is at rest in the relief area, and we'd be good to play. There you go. If the ball comes to rest in the relief area, the player has completed taking relief and must play the ball as it lies, even if it were to hit them or their equipment. If the ball comes to rest outside the relief area, the player must use the procedures in 14.3c2. In either case, there's no penalty to any player if a ball dropped in the right way accidentally, keyword there, accidentally. And that's kind of throughout the, all of the rules now. If something happens accidentally, it is way, way, way more player friendly than it used to be. So drop in the right way, and it accidentally hits any person, equipment, or other outside influence before coming to rest. There is no penalty. Except when the ball dropped in right way is deliberately deflected or stopped by any person. We're going to talk about that in 14.3d. The ball comes to rest outside the relief area. The player must drop a ball in the right way a second time. If that ball, when we drop it the second time, also comes to rest outside the relief area, the player must then complete taking relief by placing a ball, using the procedures for replacing a ball that we've already covered. We've already covered those procedures for replacing, but we're going to be placing the ball on the spot where it hit the ground the second time we dropped. Okay, and if the ball, when we're placing it, doesn't stay, we're going to follow those same procedures. So the player must place the ball in the spot. And again, this is if we've dropped twice correctly. Player must place the ball in the spot where the ball dropped the second time first touched the ground. That placed ball does not stay at rest on that spot. The player must place a ball on that spot a second time. If the ball placed a second time also does not stay on that spot, the player must place the ball on the nearest spot where the ball will stay at rest, subject to the limits of 14.2e. Got to stay in the same area of the course, can't go closer to the hole. Ball dropped in a right way twice that comes to rest outside the relief area might be placed outside the relief area. So might have to if that's the closest place where the ball will stay. If the player must complete dropping the dropping procedure by placing a ball, this might result in the player placing the ball outside the relief area. For example, if the player drops the ball for a second time in the right way and it comes to rest outside the relief area, if the placed ball does not stay on that spot after 2 attempts, the nearest spot not near the hole where the ball will stay at rest might be inside or outside that relief area. So wherever that nearest point is where the ball will stay, be it inside or outside the relief area, will be fine. All right. So what we're going to do if a drop ball in the right way is deliberately deflected or stopped by a person. Okay. So for the purpose of this rule, a drop ball is deliberately deflected or stopped when a person deliberately touches the ball in motion after it hits the ground, or if the ball in motion hits any equipment or any other object or any person, such as the player's caddy, that a player deliberately positioned or left in a particular location so the equipment, object, or person might deflect or stop the ball in motion. When a ball dropped in the right way is deliberately deflected or stopped by any person before it comes to rest, the player must drop the ball again using the procedures under 14.3b. Which means that the ball that was deliberately deflected or stopped does not count as one of the two drops. Okay, that does not count as one of the two drops. And if the ball was deliberately deflected or stopped by any person or his or her caddy, that player gets the general penalty. We just can't do that. We can't take a deliberate action to affect where that ball may or may not be. Of course, we're going to have an exception just to make it a little more complicated, but the exception is going to be when there's no reasonable chance that the ball will come to rest in the relief area. So if a drop ball, if a ball dropped in the right way is deliberately deflected or stopped, doesn't matter whether it's in the relief area or outside the relief area, when there's no reasonable chance it will come to rest in the relief area, there's not going to be a penalty to any player. And the drop ball is treated as having come to rest outside the relief area and counts as one of the two drops before a ball must be placed. So the example would be you're on a really steep slope that might be leading toward a penalty area, let's say, and you don't want that ball to bounce into the penalty area and be lost. It's really steep. You could, let's say you could position your caddy down below that after it hits the ground and before it goes into the penalty area, the caddy is going to scoop it up. So you're not spending $5.50 for each ball that you drop when it bounces into the penalty area, into the water where you might not be able to get it. So again, but there has to be no reasonable chance that the ball will come to rest in the relief area for that not to be a penalty. So we talked about those penalties. And again, 22 and 23 adds a little bit of complexities to it. All right, back to our question. Which one of the following is true? The player asks his caddy to drop for him, and the caddy does so, intending to put it into play. The ball is not in play, and the player will be penalized for playing a wrong ball if he plays it. If a player spins the ball, this is B, if a player spins the ball as he lets it go while dropping it from shoulder height and the ball hits and comes to rest in the relief area, the player gets the general penalty if he plays it. Doesn't sound right. I think we talked about that if the player drops it in the wrong way and then plays it from the correct place, it's only going to be a one-stroke penalty. A player can squat down to drop his ball as long as when he does so, the ball is dropped from the height of his knees when in a standing position. That sounds pretty good, and that's that picture of Brandon Grace that we saw. And then a drop ball that strikes the player or his equipment anytime before it comes to rest must be dropped again. So that's not true. If it hit the ground first and then hit the player, and it was accidentally, there's not going to be a penalty for that. So C was the true choice there. All right, Sue, anything?
Let me take a look here. No additional questions right now.
All right.
Did you want to take a couple minute break, or is everybody okay, or you want to just continue on?
Let's take a 5-minute break before we get into the second part here.
Great. So it says it's 10:09. We'll be back at 10:15.
Fantastic.
Great. Thanks. Seems like it's going very smooth, Jeff.
Thanks, Sue. I had put myself on mute for a minute here.
Yeah, I got you.
All right, I'll be right back. All right. All right, Sue, we seeing that?
Yes, we are.
All right, great.
Perfect.
All right, we're going to roll into the second half of 14 here and see if we can get us finished on time too. All right, so 5, 6, and 7. What we're going to cover here is mistakes in replacing, dropping, placing, or substituting. When we make these mistakes, it can be corrected, kind of our eraser rule. How to proceed when playing under stroke and distance. It's going to depend on, what part of the course we're going back to. It's going to determine on how we do this. What it means to have your ball in a wrong place. Penalty for playing from a wrong place. And match play is pretty simple. You just lose the hole. But in stroke play, it's a little bit more complex. Playing from wrong place. How to finish the hole in most cases. 2 strokes and then play on with the ball played from the wrong place. But if it's a serious breach, playing from a wrong place, we're gonna need to make a correction. Okay, the stroke play procedure for playing 2 balls when unsure if a serious breach has occurred. All right, so a long one here. I'll let you read it. All right, we'll go over this rule at the end here. All right, 14.5a, a player may lift the ball to correct a mistake before it is played. Okay, when a player has substituted another ball for the original ball when not allowed under the rules, the player may lift the ball without penalty and correct the mistake. But this is only allowed if the player hasn't played the ball yet. Okay, once the player has played that ball, they're not going to be able to correct it. Okay. And also, when the player's ball in play was replaced, dropped, or placed in any of these ways, if it was placed, dropped, or placed in a wrong place or came to rest in a wrong place, the player's ball in play was replaced, dropped, or placed in a wrong way, or if we're using a procedure that didn't apply, the player may lift the ball without penalty and correct the mistake. But again, we're only allowed to do this before the ball is played. Okay, so when a player may change to a different rule or relief option when correcting mistake and taking relief. When correcting a mistake and taking relief, whether the player must use the same rule and relief option originally used, or if the player is able to change to a different rule or relief option, depends on the nature of the mistake. And this gets a little bit complex, but I kind of look at it as the more wrong you were, the more options you're going to have, and the more right you were, the fewer options you're going to have. Okay. So there's going to be kind of 3 scenarios here. When ball was put into play under a rule that did not apply, okay? When ball was put into play under a rule that applied, but ball was dropped or placed in the wrong place. And then third, when ball was put into play under a rule that applied and was dropped or placed in the right place, but the rule requires the ball to be dropped or placed again. Those are the 3 that we're going to cover here. So the first one again, when a ball was put into play under a rule that did not apply, in correcting this mistake, The player may use any rule that applies to his or her situation. So the player wasn't proceeding correctly at all. You were choosing a rule that didn't apply, and we have some good examples for each of these. Okay, so example here is if a player mistakenly took unplayable ball relief for his or her ball in a penalty area. Okay, the player must correct the mistake. So we can't take unplayable for a ball that's in a penalty area. So we're going to correct that mistake either by replacing the ball where it originally was under Rule 9.4. So we'd have a one-stroke penalty to replace the ball back in the penalty area where it was, or also with one-stroke penalty, proceeding under Rule 17 and using any of the relief options that would be applicable for that. And so that's an example of when a ball was put into play under a rule that did not apply. We've got other options from other rules. 2, when a ball was put into play under a rule that applied, but ball was dropped or placed in a wrong place. In correcting this mistake, the player must go on to take relief under that same rule, but they're going to have the options to use. They're going to have the ability to use other relief options within that rule that would apply to his or her situation. Again, we got an example here. If when taking relief for an unplayable ball, the player used lateral relief and mistakenly dropped the ball outside the required relief area. In correcting this mistake, the player is still going to have to proceed under Rule 19.2, but may use any of the relief options. Okay, so they wouldn't just have to use the lateral. They could proceed with the stroke and distance, or or also keeping the point where the ball was and go back on the line. Okay, so they're going to have to stay within that specific rule, but they're going to be given the other options within that rule. Okay. When a ball was put into play under a rule that applied and was dropped or placed in the right place, but the rules require the ball to be dropped or placed again. In correcting this mistake, the player must, this is the third scenario, I'm sorry. The player must go on to take relief using the same rule and the same relief option. Okay, so again, when the ball was put into play under a rule that applied, okay, so they're using a correct rule, and the ball was dropped or placed in the right place, but the rules require ball to be dropped or placed again. In correcting this mistake, the player must go on to take relief using the same rule and the same relief option under that rule. So here's the example for this one. If when taking relief for an unplayable ball, the player used the lateral relief option and the ball was dropped in the relief area, but was dropped in the wrong way, or the ball came to rest outside the relief area. So the example could be that they dropped from shoulder height rather than knee height, or when they dropped, the ball came to rest outside the relief area. Okay. In correcting the mistake, the player must go on to take relief under 19.2 and using that same relief option that they had chosen. As they were proceeding largely in a correct way, and so therefore they're gonna stay within that rule and that same relief option. Okay. No penalties for a ball lifted to correct mistake. When a ball is lifted under 14.5a to correct a mistake, the player does not count any penalty for actions that were taken relating to that ball after the mistake and before it was lifted, such as accidentally causing it to move. Okay. When a ball is lifted under 14.5a to correct a mistake, so same thing. This is 2 of 2, I'm sorry. But if those actions were in breach of a rule relating to the ball that was put in play to correct the mistake, an example is such as when those actions improve the conditions affecting the stroke for the ball now in play and the original ball before it was lifted, the penalty applies to the ball now in play. All right, so here was our question here. In which of the following must the player continue with the same relief option used for the previous drop when correcting a mistake under 14.5? A player drops in the 1 club length relief area in taking stroke and distance relief from a penalty area, and his ball rolls forward to come to rest outside the relief area. Okay, that's A. A player drops outside a penalty area using the lateral relief option when he has virtual certainty his ball is in the penalty area. Before playing the drop ball, his original ball is found in the penalty area 20 yards ahead from where he dropped. C, a player drops using lateral relief from shoulder height 3 club lengths outside the edge where the ball is known to have last crossed into the penalty area. And D, a player declares his ball unplayable in a penalty area and drops using the lateral relief option with 2 club lengths of his ball in the penalty area. Okay. So the one where we're going to have to continue with the same relief option is a player drops in 1 club length relief area after taking stroke and distance. Okay, so stroke and distance, we're going back. And say it was from the fairway, and we measure out 1 club length relief area from penalty, and his ball rolls forward and comes to rest outside the relief area. It's kind of taking into consideration that he does everything correctly. The ball rolls forward and comes to rest outside the relief area, so that's closer to the hole. So he did everything correctly, and he was using a rule that applied. So he's going to have to use the same relief option when he corrects that. So I think that one takes sometimes a couple times to read, but kind of how I remember it is the more correct I am, or the player is, kind of the fewer options they have, and the more incorrect they are. If they're proceeding with proceeding under a rule that or a procedure that doesn't apply, they're going to end up having more options. All right, 14.6. Get into the definition first here. Stroke and distance. Procedure and penalty when a player takes relief under rules 17, 18, or 19 by playing a ball from where the previous stroke was made. So those are our penalty areas. It's one of our options. Stroke and distance relief, and then ball unplayable. It's one of our options. Term stroke and distance means that the player both gets a penalty stroke. So it's kind of a harsh penalty. We get that penalty stroke, but we also lose that benefit or that advantage we've gained from the distance toward the hole. It might be a short distance. It might be a 325-yard distance that you lose. You're losing that distance towards the hole from the spot where the previous stroke was made. This rule applies when a player is required or allowed under the rules. Sometimes we have to do it, and sometimes it's one of our options. So required or allowed under the rules to make the stroke from where the previous stroke was made. So that picture down below, I think, is trying to show a match play situation where the player is playing out of order, where they might have to play from that place again. That might be the opponent might require her to play that stroke again. So that's an example of stroke and playing from where the previous stroke is made isn't always stroke and distance penalty. Sometimes it's just having to play from the place where you played from before. So it's not always a stroke and distance penalty. And these are the stroke and distance penalties. And these are if the stroke is canceled, it needs to be replayed from where you played from previously. Okay. The ball were to break into pieces, ball must be played from inside the teeing area for stroke play. So we have to play again when ball played from the putting green accidentally hits any person, animal, or movable obstruction on the putting green. And replay from that place, and place from where you deliberately deflected or stopped. Stop ball must be played, and then foursome stroke play made in wrong order. So that's alternate shot. It's going to require to play from where he played from last. How the player must put a ball in play depends on the area of the course where the previous stroke was made. In all of the situations, though, the player may use either the original ball or another ball. Okay, so our first situation here, the previous stroke was made from the teeing area. The original ball or another ball must be played from anywhere inside the teeing area. Okay, anywhere. So it's that rectangular box there in that teeing area. You can play from anywhere in there. The previous stroke was made from the general area, penalty area, or a bunker. When we go back to play from any of those areas, the original ball or another ball must be dropped in this relief area. We're going to establish a reference point, and that reference point is the spot where the previous stroke was made. Again, if we don't know where that spot is, we're going to estimate it as best we can. And then the size of the relief area measured from the reference point is 1 club length. Got some limitations on that relief area that it's got to be in the same area of the course as the reference point, meaning that if the reference point is in the general area, all of the relief area has to be in that same general area. Or if the reference point was in a bunker, the relief area also has to be in the bunker. Same with a penalty area. And it must not be nearer the hole than the reference point. And none of the relief area can be closer to the hole. The previous stroke was made from the putting green. The original ball or another ball must be placed on the spot where the previous stroke was made. Again, if we don't know it, we're going to estimate it. This is probably one where you had the, really going to have to estimate. Putting greens are generally pretty clean, and it's going to be hard to find the exact spot, so you're going to estimate it. Using the procedures for replacing a ball. And we covered what to do if we can't get the ball when we're placing it or replacing it, if we can't get it to stay on that spot, that original spot. All right, that's 14-6. Home stretch. All right, playing from a wrong place. Kind of the real meat of this segment here. Two definitions here. Okay, let you read this. And so if you're interested in taking the test, like the USGA PGA Rules Workshop test, something, especially when I see a question that's this long, I go to the last sentence usually to kind of look what they're looking for. They're looking for the total score, so you can start counting and thinking about it as you're reading it. All right, so we'll get to that. Wrong place definition. Any place on the course other than where the player is required or allowed to play his or her ball under the rules. Examples of playing from a wrong place are playing a ball after replacing it on the wrong spot. We don't replace it when the rules tell us that we're required to do so. Playing a drop ball from outside the required relief area. That would be playing from a wrong place. Playing a ball from outside the teeing area and starting the play of a hole and trying to correct that mistake, or in trying to correct that mistake, is not playing from a wrong place. That's covered under Rule 6. Okay. Place from where a ball must be played. After starting a hole, a player must make a stroke from where his or her ball comes to rest. Pretty simple game. Except we can play from someplace else when the rules require or allow the player to do so. The player must not play his or her ball that's in play from a wrong place. Penalty for playing from a wrong place is the general penalty. So in match play, it's really clean. You just lose the hole. So, but in stroke play, it's a little more complex. So match play, we're not going to talk about in this part here. This is only for stroke play. How to complete a hole after playing from a wrong place in stroke play. Player must decide whether to play out the hole with the ball played from the wrong place, or if they need to correct the mistake from playing from a wrong place. And what's going to determine whether or not we're going to play out or correct it is whether the player has their infraction is a serious breach. So, in a serious breach is going to be, determining if the player gained a significant advantage for playing from that wrong place. And in stroke play, when playing from a wrong place, this is serious breach. In stroke play, when playing from a wrong place, did the player gain a significant advantage compared to the stroke to be made from the right place? In making these comparisons to decide if there was a serious breach, the factors to be taken into account include the following, and they're in no specific order, but these are things that need to be considered. The difficulty of the stroke, the distance of the ball from the hole, and I think that's the one that comes into play the most between that one and the next one. The distance from the hole, or the effect of the obstacles on line of play, whether or not you cleared over a body of water or something like that, could be considered part of the obstacles on the line of play. And the conditions affecting the stroke. What was the lie of the ball? Was it in, bad country, whatever it might be. Okay, the concept of a serious breach does not apply in match play because a player simply loses the hole if he or she plays from a wrong place. Okay, so player must decide whether to play out the hole with the ball played from the wrong place or to correct the mistake from the right place. Okay. We're going to talk about these three scenarios. If it's not a serious breach, if it is a serious breach, and what to do if uncertain whether breach is serious or not. Okay. So the first one here is we're talking about situations where it is not a serious breach. Player must play out the hole with the ball played from the wrong place without correcting the mistake. So we got a video here, or an example anyway. Okay, so I'll play that again. So the ball is on a cart path. Nearest point of complete relief is there, but the ball was dropped in the wrong place on the other side, and the player played. In this situation, we're saying that it's not a serious breach. It didn't gain anything that we know of as far as, let's just say that the grass is the same type. It's just a regular primary rough. They didn't gain any advantage distance-wise. It doesn't look like they're gaining any advantage as far as clearing any obstacles or playing over water or anything like that. So the player is just going to play on with that ball played from the wrong place, getting that two-stroke penalty. Okay, so now we're going to talk about if it is a serious breach. The player must correct the mistake by playing out the hole with a ball played from the right place under the rules. Okay, so again, I'll play a little. example. So that again, so the ball struck, hits the tree, and bounces into a yellow penalty area. Player is a little bit confused and takes lateral relief, which is not one of the options for a yellow penalty area. Plays it up onto the green. Okay, so that's a wrong place. That was not one of the options that the player had. Okay. If the player doesn't correct the mistake before making a stroke to begin another hole, or for the final hole of the round, if they're playing the final hole before returning his or her scorecard, the player is going to be disqualified. So this is a really harsh penalty, but the player has gained a significant advantage here, both in distance and in not having to clear the hurdle of the water. So this is definitely a serious breach. So it's a serious penalty. What to do if uncertain whether breach is serious? The player should play out the hole with both the ball played from the wrong place and a second ball played from the right place under the rules. Okay, so this is where the player should have played from, or one of the options. They could have taken stroke and distance as well. Okay, so they're going to play out both balls. Okay. Part of this is the player who tries to correct the mistake must report to the committee what happened. If the player tries to correct the mistake under 1 by playing a ball from the right place, the player must report the facts to the committee before returning the scorecard. Sorry, didn't get ahead of myself. I did get ahead of myself. I'm sorry. Sorry, gang. Okay. Player who tries to correct the mistake must report to the committee. If the player tries to correct the mistake under 1 by playing the ball from the right place, the player must report the facts to the committee before returning the scorecard. You've got to tell the committee, what happened, because we may have proceeded incorrectly, even in trying to correct the error. So this applies whether the player played out the hole with only that ball or with 2 balls. Okay? Either way, we have to tell the committee what happened. Hopefully we've done, if we played 2 balls, hopefully one of those is correct. So we've got it. But either way, we've got to tell the committee. And if we're played 2 balls, we have to tell the committee, even if the score for both balls is the same. Because again, there's a chance that neither one of the procedures that we took were correct. Or both, it could be a situation maybe that both were correct. I don't know. The player does not report the facts to the committee, he or she would be disqualified. Player's score for the hole depends on whether the committee decides that there was a serious breach in playing the original ball from a wrong place. Okay, so this is the example we had with no serious breach. Okay, so the score played from the wrong place counts, and the player only gets the not only, but gets the general penalty. If the second ball was played, all strokes that count, including strokes made and penalty strokes for playing that second ball, do not count. Okay. Stroke made in playing the original ball from a wrong place and more strokes with that ball, including strokes made and any penalty strokes solely playing that ball, do not count. score with the ball played to correct the mistake of playing from a wrong place counts. So we're going to get the penalty for playing from a wrong place, and then we're going to count the rest of the strokes with the ball that we use to correct the mistake. If the ball played to correct the mistake was also played from a wrong place, if the committee decides that this too, that this was not a serious breach, they're going to end up having 2 general penalties, for playing from a wrong place, the one that was a serious breach, and then playing from the wrong place again, not a serious breach. They're going to have 4 penalty strokes. They're all added to the score of that ball. The committee decides that that ball used to correct the serious breach was also a serious breach. The player is not going to be able to have a score and is going to be disqualified. All right, so for these longer worded ones, again, I usually go to the end. What is the score for the whole? And anytime there's one of these that there's a score from the whole, I make a little a T to count the strokes, and on the left side of that T, top left, I put, strokes made, and then the other side, I put a P for penalty. So it's just so you can start counting. So in stroke play, a player's drive is hit toward a penalty area. Okay, so that's one shot. They hit a drive. Okay, hits a drive towards a penalty area with heavy rough and bushes outside of it. After 3 minutes of searching, both outside and in the penalty area, the player drops a ball outside the penalty area, estimating the spot where he thinks his ball probably crossed into the penalty area. Okay, he hits that ball onto the putting green and holes out with 2 putts. He then consults with the referee, who tells him his drop outside the penalty area was not proper because there was not knowledge or virtual certainty his ball was in the penalty area. And we know that by saying that there was heavy rough and bushes outside the penalty area. That player, if he didn't know where the ball was, if it wasn't known or virtually certain that the ball went in the penalty area, he can't take that drop. Okay, and has to go back to the tee to correct his error before playing out the hole from there. He plays again. So hits his tee shot. He plays that shot after taking a drop. So that's going to be a 2-shot penalty for having played from a wrong place. Okay. Now he's going to have to correct that because this he's not just going to go on from there. He's got to go back to the tee, and the referee told him that because that would have been a serious breach. He goes back to the tee and he gets a penalty for stroke and distance. Okay, so that's 3 penalty strokes. He still has to take that penalty for stroke and distance. Goes back to the tee. He plays from the tee again. So that's another shot, another stroke that he's made. And then he holes out with 3 more shots. So he's got 5 strokes that he's made with talent, and he's got 3 penalty strokes. So there you can see it. The first original tee shot with that single hash mark under stroke, the 2 for playing from a wrong place, the 1 stroke for the stroke and distance, and then 4 more strokes with that ball when he went back to correct it. So the correct score was 8. But again, if you're somebody that's, chasing after a score on one of these tests, read that last sentence first when you're reading the question. You know what you're looking for. But then I always do that little T graph, that chart to mark the strokes. Any questions in there, Sue?
Let me take a look here. I've just checked. No, all good. All good.
That wraps us up. If anybody has any questions about any of that we just covered or anything else, you've got some good resources in the class today too. So good time to ask questions if you've got any.
Hey, Jeff, Clark, we're on the putting green and the ball won't stay on the spot. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but the ball won't stay. So we've marked it. Now we find a place where it will stay on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
That ball is then still considered to be under the first mark that we made, correct?
Say that again, Clarky.
Well,
So
we marked our ball on the putting green. It won't stay on the spot. So now we find a place where it will. Maybe it's 3 or 4 inches to the left. And we place it there. And my question is, that's still considered to have been originally marked. Reason I say that is if we place it there, let's say it comes to rest and then it moves. If we've marked it, if we're considered to have marked it, it owns the spot, even if it's the new spot. You see what I'm driving at?
Yeah, absolutely. That would still be considered that we have marked it, and that we would own that spot for sure.
Okay, good.
Jeff, nice presentation. Really well
Yes.
done. I like the way you described 14.5. Our colleague Mike Raby says it kind of in the same way, but from a different angle. He says you're stuck with what you got right. So you keep what you got right, which is the flip side of how you said it. And I have to remember it in the way you said it or the way he said it to remember that rule.
Yeah, it almost is a little counterintuitive that you get less with more accuracy, but same thing. I mean, there's reasons, if you thought you got 3 club lengths outside of, of lateral relief, and you thought that was your drop, and then you find out that you were wrong, and you go to correct it, and then you realize, oh wow, I really don't want that. That doesn't work now. You might have chosen something different if you had known more correctly.
Yep.
Yeah, and I would say that for those, once again, who are looking to get a good score on the exam, that 14.5 there, you'll definitely get a question about that.
That was a big rule. Thank you, Jeff. We
All right.
use it in applying every other rule. So use all those procedures.
Absolutely.
Good
All
job.
right. Well, thank you everybody for joining.
Okay.
And how many do we have left? We have a few left, a couple
We have
left.
2
right?
left. I'll be doing Monday. I'll be doing the different relief procedures for both free relief and penalty relief, rules 15 through 19. I'm going to do cliff notes on some of those. Since you covered all of these procedures for the ball, we should be able to move through those within our 2-hour window. And then Clarky and I are going to wrap up on the last session doing rule 20 and 23. Probably we'll start with 23, Clarky, and talk about 4-ball. I think we use that format at a lot of our facilities, and then go over some committee procedures and just use the time to answer any other questions that folks might have.
Sounds good. I'll contact you before that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Great. Matt and Sue, thanks for your help.
Good job.
Clarky, thanks for chairing our committee for as long as you did. And Alice, thanks for taking on the role.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.